Serious. People of Reddit, what is the one thing that was so disturbing and gruesome you saw in your life that still disturbs you deeply to this day? Not safe for work, part 2. Viewer discretion is advised. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Authorities pulling a boy's body out of the ocean, and there were 50 crabs all over him holding onto their meal. When I was about 10 or 11, my older sister jumped out of our moving van trying to kill herself while my mom was driving. We were going about 55 and she hit the ground and the back tire ran over her. She somehow survived and has a normal life with her husband now. I don't really talk to her about it that much, but it was an awful experience. I found my stepdad dead on our dining room floor. He'd only been dead since the morning, and I found him after school, but his skin was mottled in purple. His ears were swollen and purple. His skin was cold and he was rigid. I have flashbacks to that day a lot. IED hit a vehicle and sealed the doors. People inside tried to kick out the bulletproof windows. Now you couldn't see them do this, but afterwards you could see their melted boot prints on the inside. I'll never forget those melted boot prints. I saw someone's leg degloved. It was fucked. I was walking to school and someone bailed on their motorbike without proper protection on the road I walked to school in. The silhouetted outline of body parts and pieces of metal and plastic strewn over the road when a family friend was hit head-on and killed while driving a motorcycle. Watched my stepdad try to kill himself by hanging himself off the fire escape at our apartment. He told me to tell your mom I said goodnight, and he jumped off. When my parents were divorcing, my dad waited until everyone was out, then set fire to our house and cut his wrists. He didn't die, but I remember going back into the deserted house weeks later to get some stuff and seeing all the blood on my parents' bed and sprays of it everywhere. Old blood looks almost black. I was only 12. When I was 15, my 13-year-old best friend shot himself in the head. I was the first person to find him, still have nightmares, and I'm 30 now. Saw the smeared remains of a guy who tried to cross a busy highway and was obliterated by an 18-wheeler. My first trip to Mexico, saw a guy walking on the side of the road during a storm, was struck by lightning, and my grandpa put him in the bed of the truck to take him to the hospital, but the poor fellow fell dead instantly. I remember I kept looking back and saw and smelled charred flesh. I was only 4 years old. 24 years later, that image still haunts me to this day. Saw a jogger get hit by a car when I was driving with my aunt. She pulled over and ran to help and call 911, and she came back to the car covered in blood. I was like 7. Used to work in journalism. 2 bad car wrecks come to mind. One was a head-on highway crash involving a van with 8 people in it. They were all trapped when the van caught fire and burned to death. Got there as the bodies were being removed. Didn't see much, but the smell. Second was a motorcycle crash. Motorcyclist took a sharp curve at 50 miles per hour and ended up impaled in a chain-link fence. Not nearly as gruesome as some of these, but watching my best friend be taken by brain cancer. Over the course of 15 months, he lost 100 pounds and turned into a yellowed husk of a healthy 23-year-old he was before. It was a grueling process. Walked in on the nurses getting my dad ready to go down to the morgue when I was 17. I wanted to just spend a few more minutes with him, but instead saw my naked, dead dad getting all his tubes yanked. It's been over 20 years, and I can see the macabre humor in it, but still. Almost home, after a long work trip, came up on a gruesome 3-car wreck on a 2-lane highway. I saw a state trooper covering the body of a 5-year-old. This was about 10 years ago. My friend at work, falling out of a 30-foot tower, landed headfirst and died in my arms. I was covered in his blood and had a massive mental breakdown after that. Second would be the sight of my own fingers after being degloved at same factory. Nothing but bone left on my ring and middle fingers up to the first knuckle. Saw a video of a guy being tortured by gang members. He had his hands and feet cut off and the skin on his face was peeled off so you could see every muscle. The gang members then tried using a rusty garden tool to cut his head off. It was too dull, so every time they tried, he would just thrash and reach up to grab the dull blade with his stumps. Shit will never leave my brain, unfortunately. When my ex, long-distance girlfriend, cut her own neck on video call with me watching with a razor blade, there was nothing I could do but watch and beg her to stop. She had a bad case of schizophrenia, so it was really bad. A room full of cats and kittens, some of them very tiny and newborn with their throats all slit. Worked in animal control and went to a location of a very well-known animal hoarder who was barred from owning animals due to prior abuse. Basically, she starved 6 dogs to death. Got the call that she was hoarding animals again, went to location, and the woman was sitting on her porch when asked. I pulled my 4 days dead brother out of the closet he hung himself in. The way his eyes and tongue were bulging out of his head and the green-purple color of his skin still haunt my dreams to this day. My greatest failure was not realizing my little brother was hurting that bad. I still hate myself for it. I know it's not my fault. I just miss my little brother. I was picking my daughter up from school and saw a little kid run across the street and get smacked by a car. She was airborne and did about 3 flips. I stuck around and gave a statement to police. I could see her hair stuck in the busted part of the windshield her head hit. It was blowing in the wind. She had long hair. She survived. I remember her mom showing up and being in denial there was anything wrong with her. She refused an ambulance for her daughter. There was an F1 race in South Africa in the 70s. One car caught on fire and the emergency crew ran out onto the track, and this one guy almost got hit by an F1 car and then actually got hit by another. He was decapitated and his body like ripped in half. You can even see his intestines. A pickup in front of me on a winding mountain road hit a deer. Both front legs were broken, and watching it try to stand up and running was haunting. Also, had a family member when I was younger with serious mental illness. He had some freakouts involving police that were miserable to see. I once had a guy actively push away rescuers, me trying to save him from drowning. When I was in my teens, I learned to sail in a small lake near my village. When I was 16, I was old enough to take the lifeguard and support craft courses, so I trained up, got my certs, and started supporting the safety boat during events. Because I lived close by, my dad and I were also listed as emergency contacts for the sailing club. Anyway, this lake had a reputation at the time for being dangerous in areas due to being an old chalk mine. Steep sides and 20-feet cliffs surrounded part of the lake. People used to have parties, drink, swim, and jump off these cliffs into the water. One day they took it a step further, broke into the sailing club and stole a dinghy and went paddling around the lake. The police were called by some passers-by and several of the club's emergency contacts, including me. When I arrived, the police had dealt with a lot of the party on the shore, but there was still the matter of the guys in the boat. Our plan was to simply head out on the safety boat, grab the lines of the dinghy, and tow it to shore with the guys in it. But they had been drinking and decided to put up a fight. One guy fell in and immediately started panicking, splashing all over the place. We could all see him. He couldn't swim. We tried to grab him from the safety boat, but he pushed us away and went under. It was almost like he wanted saving, but not by us for fear of getting in trouble. My colleague and I went in after him and quickly caught him, but he was still panicking and struggled, fists flailing, and just refused to let us take him to the surface. He caught me in the eye and scratched my colleague's face, trying to get away from us, and just kept sinking deeper. Our lifeguard training states that when a rescue starts endangering the lives of the rescuers, you have to pull back and abandon the attempt, so we did. After maybe a minute under the water, we backed off and returned to the boat. Shortly after, his body came up to the surface, face down, just bobbing. We grabbed him as quick as we could and performed emergency CPR on the boat back to shore, but he never woke up. When the ambulance arrived, he was pronounced dead, all because he stole a boat when he couldn't swim and then refused rescue. I think he was only in his early 20s. When I was young, I was experimenting with cocaine. A homeless guy from the neighborhood got me some and I broke him off a line. He proceeded to roll up his sleeve and reveal a huge open wound, pulled out a needle, mixed it with water, and then injected it into the wound. That was enough to turn me off of that. I don't know how he didn't lose his arm, that was nasty as hell. Ugh. The full video of the nut who live streamed himself shooting up a bunch of people in New Zealand, that video fucked me up. The part towards the end where the lady was just walking down the sidewalk and he executed her, and you could see her hair and fragments of her skull get blown away. Fuck, I wish I could get that out of my head. I've got two. First one, homeless man was shot by police after charging them with a knife after they were calling because he was throwing rocks and passing cars and pedestrians. His body was left in the street uncovered for quite some time, and he was facing the window of the building I was working in, staring into my soul with wide open eyes. I didn't stare, but one glimpse was enough. Second, as a volunteer firefighter, whose chief was also the coroner for a rural county in the northern United States, we would be asked to help with difficult body removals. A man had committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. He put a hose in his exhaust pipe and duct taped the other end to the open window, sat inside long enough to run the gas tank out. He hadn't shown up for work for 3 days, so his employer called for a wellness check. It was a week of sub-zero temperatures, and he was seated in the driving position. The coroner had to break bones and frozen flesh for us to be able to move his body out of the vehicle. I still have nightmares of both situations. I've seen a lot working in the medical field, from a former soldier slashing her wrists so deep in a suicide attempt that she required heavy-duty sutures, probably around 40 to 50, wrist, to holding a woman's hand, staring into her eyes while she had a stroke and couldn't speak or move, to a 12-year-old girl coming in with her mom for abdominal pain and possible cyst or tumor, only to discover she was 16 weeks pregnant with her mom's sex offender boyfriend's baby, to having to do CPR on my colleague's 16-year-old daughter while she watched, screaming in the background. But the absolute worst was easily a young woman who had been brutally raped and sodomized. I won't go into detail, but she was physically damaged in ways I didn't even think were possible. Her wounds were like nothing I had ever seen, and she was basically catatonic. She would scream out of nowhere at the top of her lungs while we processed the labs to be sent out, but wouldn't speak or make eye contact otherwise. She was taken to psych, obviously, but I've never forgotten her, and for years I've hoped she was able to get the help she needed and that she came through it okay eventually. About 6 years ago, I lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee. When I would finish my shift at work, I would walk down the road a couple blocks and visit my gal pal as her shift started. One day I was doing just that and thought I saw a funny-looking stick on the sidewalk. After I got closer, it became obvious that it was a severed dog's leg. Nothing else, just the leg. I haven't the slightest idea about how it ended up there, but nobody would believe me until a coworker saw it herself a few days later. While it's certainly not the most shocking, it has been fucking with me ever since. I watched a mother goose and her goslings crossing a busy road. They made it 80% of the way across, then the mother got run over by an SUV. She didn't immediately die, and the goslings had no idea what to do now that they weren't able to follow her. Fortunately, someone picked them up and took them off to a shelter, but the guy who hit had to twist the mother goose's neck around a lot to end her suffering. It was not pretty, and he was not able to do it quickly or cleanly. I've seen plenty of videos of people dying and getting dismembered and stuff, and I've never liked that, but this was probably the most upsetting thing I've ever seen. I guess it wasn't particularly gory or gruesome, but it always bothered me more than gory shock videos that get spread around. I saw it on LiveLeak a few years ago. I don't know what country it was, but it was something filming on a cell phone, and they were sitting with this kid, a little blonde boy no older than 10 or 12. The kid's joking around and being a goof, doing these really dramatic gangster poses and stuff. The cameraman seems friendly, joking with the kid. They're sitting on a stone wall, and there's a street behind them. It's broad daylight, cars driving by. A man approaches them from behind, and the cameraman says something unintelligible in the video that makes the kid's face go white. You can see the fear in his eyes. The kid tries to get up and gets cornered by them. The two men start asking if the kid thinks he's tough shit for stealing, and the newer guy starts pushing the kid around. The kid looks like he's about to run. His voice is getting high-pitched, and he's stammering over his words. The man grabs him by the shirt and immediately shoots him in the head. It happened so quickly. The kid falls against the wall hard and just lays there. Cameraman gets a close-up of the kid's face and bullet wound. The men laugh and casually walk away, turning the video off. The kid was so young. Watching him go from being a goofy kid messing around to completely fearful in a few short seconds made my heart drop. He knew exactly what was about to happen, and he was completely alone and helpless. I can't imagine how scared he was. I don't know what he did, what those men were, or if he was guilty of the accusation of theft, but he was just a little kid. I can't imagine he deserved the death. I saw a car accident. This Lambo flew by us going 120, maybe even more, and my friend's like, wow, what a bunch of fucking idiots. I'm like, yeah, but they live for that shit. Boom. Explosion in the distance. This car flew off the road and into the woods. It was dark out. I got out of my car to go see if I could find them and help them. I couldn't find their car. I am CPR certified, as if that matters at all in this situation. The tire marks ended and there was no car, which was just the scariest feeling. The car was above my head in the trees. Windshield smashed, car cut in half. No bodies in the seats. They were scattered around me. The two of them were dead. Their bodies were like bags of garbage, shattered bones, flat bodies, like their bones were just mush. One of them crashed into a tree, and the other was just lying there on the ground. I thought that was bad. The worst part was their sister was following them a few miles back, and she got out of the car screaming. I've never heard anyone cry so hard or scream so much. It was terrible. For months, I acted like it didn't bother me, because it kind of didn't. The part about them loving that and dying happily doing what they loved most made me happy, but as the months went on, their bodies were just not out of my mind. It sucked and still does, and when I told the story to my therapist, he said it's fucked up that I could tell that story without any emotions.